Please join me in welcoming Shai Marohn.
Thank you. I'll take care of it.
I'm off.
It's all good. Thank you. Let me switch over to my mic too. There we go. This is very nice. I will say, I get invited to speak in a lot of places. This has been an exceptionally kind and generous group that I've been able to meet, and everybody's said very nice things about me, and it's very nice. I really like the ideas. I'm gonna go home tonight, and my wife will humble me again and say, like, you're not that important. So I hope we leave behind a lot of good ideas and a lot of good thoughts, because that's really what we're here and what it's about. This is my hometown. I'm from a little town called Brainerd, Minnesota. It's a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what it looked like in 1870. The interesting thing about this city is that this is what all cities prior to our 20th century experiment in city building, this is how every single city looked when it started. Now, it would have different building materials, you know, native kind of things, but they all started like a little pop-up shack. Some people making a little bet on the future. They had some hopes and dreams about what could become, and they were trying to make a go of it. Every single city in human history started this way. And when they were successful, they would grow. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and they would thicken up in place. Think of a culture growing in a petri dish. You would see this kind of incremental growth. And so my town was one of those ones that were successful. And in 35 years, this exact same street would become this street here. And as my city continued to grow, incrementally up, incrementally out, and thicken up and mature in place, eventually these 2- and 3-story wood structures would be replaced with buildings of brick and granite. This is the exact same street. I like to show, I used to show multiple cities transitions here. Mine is a very small town, 14,000 people today, but I want to show you that this dynamic exists in other cities as well. This is a city that you have probably heard of. This is a square actually in that city in 1878. I have a few photos of this square as it evolved over time. At some point here, you will probably recognize it as Times Square. So this idea of growing incrementally over time is really powerful. It doesn't mean that we all become Times Square, but it does mean that we all change and mature and evolve as we grow. I feel like the best way to think of this would start with my daughter. This is Chloe Grace. She was my wife and I's first daughter. When she was born, of course, everybody who's a parent in this room knows the feeling and recognizes the perfection in a little baby, right? Like they are literally beautiful. They're perfect. There's nothing you would change about them except that they spit up on you and scream all night and have a diaper that you have to change regularly. And when you're a parent, you love this kid. You think like they're absolutely perfect. But I do see like what they will grow into someday as being not a better version of themselves, but like a different version of themselves, right? And eventually she got there, right? She's now, she goes through the toddler phase and the adolescent phase. And this kid is beautiful. Like I love her at this phase too. She's sleeping through the night. She uses the toilet. She's like, does all those things. But now we go through the phase where she's got to put on her own shoes and we're late for church, or we get somewhere where she doesn't want to be and she throws a fit. And as a parent, you're like, if we could just get beyond that, like move beyond that. I love her to death. She's perfect. But boy, if we could just fix these things, and then we do, right? And in each phase of life, in each phase of her kind of maturing and growing as a parent, as someone who's stewarding this kid through the world, you have different things that you grow to love and appreciate that are new, even though it is the same person, but also challenges that you are, in a sense, like working with them to overcome. She is now a junior at the University of Minnesota. I'm very, very proud of her. But you can see in each of these photos, this is the same person. This is the same person, in a sense, maturing over time. And nobody who knows her today would look at that original photo and say, that's not Chloe, right? Of course it is. Obviously it is. But it's a different version of the same person. It's easy to love this kid through all of these phases. So look at this city. Because what we are used to in North America, particularly post-World War II, is a development pattern where the default condition is stasis, the lack of change. To replace that war spending, we needed to lower unemployment, we needed to build a middle class, and the easiest way for it to do that is to have our cities grow, grow, grow. And as a country, we could make that happen. We could invest in infrastructure, we could build a highway system, we could subsidize housing, we could subsidize commercial development, and we could make our cities grow phenomenally fast. And in fact, that's what we did. This is a timeline, the 2.5 decades at the end of World War II, 1945 on the left, 1970 on the right. Here's what our economy did during that period of time. An unprecedented level of growth in GDP, something we've not experienced since, something no one has experienced before. At the same time, our public debt grew, but by much smaller amounts. And again, if we refer to like the world of economists, this allowed us to solve a deep economic problem, the debt to GDP ratio. We were able to reduce as a percent of our economy, our public sector debt. When you hear economists today or politicians or what have you talk about growing our way out of our problems, for those of you, I'm 52, for those of you that are my age or older, you've heard since the 80s the idea that we're going to cut taxes today, we're going to do this stimulus today, that will add to the deficit today, but tomorrow the deficit will go down because we've had all this growth. That's never happened in my lifetime, but the theory of how that would happen comes from this 2.5 decades after World War II, when that actually did happen. I want to show you what this looks like in a geographic place. This is a map I've got of Fresno, California. And I'm going to show you this because I've got a good map of Fresno, but it also tells a story that I think will be very familiar to you. This yellow box here is the boundaries of Fresno, California in 1897. And I want you to watch how the boundaries of the city change over time. So 1909, 1922, now we're in the depths of the Great Depression. And now we're at the end of World War II. What you're seeing there is that incremental development pattern, that incrementally up, incrementally out, thickening up, maturing of a place, going from a toddler to a adolescent to a preteen. That's what you're seeing there. Now, World War II is over. We don't want to slide back into the Great Depression. We want to grow, grow, grow. So we're going to turn our cities into machines of growth. And here's what that looks like. 1958, 1970, here's 1983, 95, and then the last one I've got is 2010. My hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota, at the end of World War II was roughly 14,000 people. Today, my city is roughly 14,000 people, but it's 10 times the area. 10 times the amount of road, 10 times the amount of pipe, 10 times the amount of area to provide police and fire protection to. We have not experienced growth in terms of population, but we've experienced growth in terms of area. I was invited to be part of a group that was trying to help the city of Lafayette, Louisiana understand why they were broke, why they had no money. And I can't say it any simpler than that. The mayor actually said, I was there giving a talk and I met with the mayor and he said, why are we broke? And I said, well, he's like, help us understand this. And so a friend of mine named Joe Minicozy, his team, I was there helping them try to figure this out. We spent a year working in the city. I'm going to show you the map here in a bit that came out of that work. But one of the things we discovered is that in the post-war era, we were there in 2015, Lafayette grew a tremendous amount. They increased their population by 3.5 times. But when we looked at things like their water system, we saw that at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person to provide drinking water for the people of Lafayette. In 2015, that was 50 feet of pipe, 10 times. When we looked at things like what did it take to provide fire protection, at the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. So in Lafayette, Louisiana, they've been able to experience very, very robust population growth, 3.5 times. But in order to do it, their liabilities have grown by 10 times and 20 times. Now, sometimes people will say, well, Chuck, I get it. Like, that makes sense. We have more stuff today. We have bigger houses. We have more cars. We have more things. We're just far, far richer and wealthier. And that is true in some degree. We certainly have those things. But when we look at the median household income of a family in Lafayette, Louisiana, while the city's liabilities, the things that the taxpayers are on the hook for, have grown by 10 times and 20 times, family income has only grown by 1.6 times during that same period of time. It's a very standard thing we see in cities across America. In fact, the typical Lafayette, Louisiana resident has a negative net worth. They actually owe more in debt than they have in assets. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground. This is my hometown. This is Brainerd, Minnesota. My office is a couple blocks that way, and then my house is like 6 blocks that way. This was the kind of the second neighborhood built in my city. I want you to look at these 2 blocks right here. They're the exact same size, same area, same amount of public infrastructure. They're on the same thoroughfare, the same neighborhood. Everything about them is the same except for the style of development. This area was built out in the 1920s. So this plat was made on the far edge of town, and then you had the commercial development that came in. All 3 of these blocks, the 2 that I've highlighted and the one in the middle, used to look like that one on the left. What does that look like? That looks like that 1870s pop-up shack that I showed you in the beginning, right? That's what it is. This is the far edge of town. In the 1920s, people on the far edge of town went out and built kind of the cheapest commercial building they could build, with the idea that if the city continued to grow the way cities have grown for thousands of years, the city would continue to grow incrementally out while their neighborhood then became closer to the middle. The property values, the land value would go up. That would prompt kind of a natural redevelopment. You would get a second and third stories. The buildings would become more intense, more ornate. That's not what happened. We built this neighborhood in the 1920s. Then we had the Great Depression. Then we had World War II. Then we had a new development pattern that just skipped past this neighborhood and built out on the edge. These 3 blocks have stagnated for a century. The city, kind of fed up with the decline and the neglect, labeled this whole area as blighted, was able to get the building on the left torn down, and now we have a new Taco John's drive-through. We're in Utah. You all have Taco John's here, right? No? One? Where's it at?
Fillmore.
Okay.
Middle of Utah, middle of nowhere.
Okay, so no one knows. Okay. Taco John's, you can think of as like Norwegian Mexican food. It is, we like it in Minnesota. It fits our very mild cheddar cheeses, that kind of thing. So everybody is thrilled about this transaction, right? We got rid of a block of blight. We've got something in here that meets all of our zoning codes, all of our building codes. It's got the right amount of parking. It meets the sign ordinance. We had the bike walk committee that showed up and asked for a sidewalk. So they put a sidewalk in there. The sidewalk ends right there, but they got that little stretch. The environmental group showed up and wanted them to put native stormwater plants in. And so there's actually like a little ditch in the back with some weeds in it that they put in. I say this because everybody who was interested in something got their box checked as part of this process. Here's what nobody bothered to look at or concern themselves with. That old blighted rundown block, you had all those buildings together, that has a value of $1.1 million. The block on the right, it's the same size area, it's the same amount of public infrastructure, has a value of only $600,000. The city's actually collecting 78% more property tax which is our only tax source. We don't do sales tax or income tax. Collecting 78% more from the block on the left than the block on the right. The block on the left has more net employees, obviously has more local ownership. When we went out and interviewed people, they do things like use a local attorney, use a local accountant, use a local banker. And so they're kind of part of our economic ecosystem in a way that, the franchise on the right is not. This is a very compelling case study. It's not a cherry-picked one. This is a pattern we see repeated over and over. I mentioned my friend Joe earlier. Joe and his organization Urban 3, which I think has done some work here locally too as well in Ivins. They have pioneered some very insightful things looking at the productivity of land within a city. They've done a lot of other things, but that's kind of the very first thing that they became widely known for. If you think of a farmer spreading seed across a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, we would say that's the most productive part of the field. That's where you get the most bushels per acre, for example. Well, where in a city do we get the most value per acre? Where is there the most wealth per acre? This is Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York is a city that has suffered greatly post-World War II. In fact, Buffalo has lost population every single year since 1945. It's been a continual downward trend, and there was a hope that last year would be a first year they didn't. They lost population last year too. But when we step back and we say, where is the wealth in Buffalo? The wealth is in those pre-Great Depression neighborhoods. Despite their condition, despite their decline, they are a massive repository of wealth. And that wealth absolutely dwarfs everything that we have built subsequent. We see this pattern repeated over and over again in cities big and small, in cities that are northern, southern, on water, away from water, throughout the west of our country. We see this pattern. Every place here you have a pre-Great Depression neighborhood. One of these neighborhoods that was built incrementally, that was allowed to evolve and shift and change over time. You see tremendous levels of financial productivity. But everywhere where you see a post-World War II neighborhood, and the further you go out in time, and in other words, the more recent they are, the lower the financial productivity actually is on those places. I said I would show you the Lafayette, Louisiana map. That's this one right here. This is a different map than the ones I've shown you here. These are all where's the community's wealth and productivity. This one you can think of as a profit and loss map for the city. One of the things we did is we added up, we went to Lafayette and we tried to find where are all your roads, where are all your sidewalks, where's all the pipes, where's all the parks and the buildings, and how much is this stuff going to cost to maintain indefinitely over time? Because, you buy a house, you have a street in front of your house, you pay your taxes to the city, you expect the city to take care of your street, not once, not twice, but indefinitely, right? That's kind of the deal that we make. So what does that look like for Lafayette? You can, from an economic standpoint, say this street costs this much, it will last this long. You can put that into annual terms, and that's what we did for every obligation that the city has. We mapped those all up. Then we looked at every revenue source that the city had. They do have sales tax. They also have property tax. We looked at all their utility fees and where those were coming from, and we mapped those up. And when we got done, we mashed all these maps together into what you can think of as a profit and loss map for the city. Every place where you see a blue property, that's a property that pays more in taxes and fees to the city on an annual basis than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. Every place where you see red is the exact opposite. These are places that cost more to serve and provide ongoing service and maintenance to than they themselves pay in taxes and fees. Let me show you what's going on. The higher the line goes, the more that disparity is. So this middle of town here is their core downtown. To the right of that, this little crescent of blue, that is the kind of original neighborhood in the city. Here's some photos of what that looks like. The downtown it's a downtown. You can go there and listen to a cool Zydeco band and get like a cheap taco. It's kind of fun, but no one's looking at this going, this is really, really prosperous, right? The neighborhood in the bottom is typical of what you see in that blue crescent, these little shotgun shacks. This is basically like where the poorest people in town live. So again, no one looks at this as really prosperous, but from a math standpoint, these places here are subsidizing these places here, right? All that stuff out on the edge. That's the malls, the strip malls, the big box stores, the franchise restaurants, the windy cul-de-sac streets. That's the stuff that's in red on the edge. In Lafayette, Louisiana, they've had a lot of growth. But when we added up everything, what we found is that in 2015, the median household pays $1,500 in taxes to the city. In order for the city to maintain everything that they've built, when that road falls apart, go out and fix it. When that pipe needs repair, go out and take care of that. When that pump goes bad, replace it and repair it. In order for the city to do all of that, the median family's taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. One out of every $5 that a family makes, 20% of their income, will need to get sent back to the city. And that's not to do anything new. That's not to invest in any kind of new stuff. That's just to take care of what they've already promised. The city, when we started, had a $50 million backlog of road maintenance. You looked at how much they were paying per year, and it was going to take them something like 26 years to clear their backlog. The $50 million backlog has grown now to, I think the last time I heard it was over $150 million. Because like more things have come due and they just don't have the money, so they put it off, they put it off, they put it off. They've grown extremely fast, but all of that growth creates for them a lot of immediate cash. So you get, the developer comes in, builds the road, turns that over to the city, builds the sewer and water, turns that over to the city. The city, in a sense, spends nothing for that new growth. But the city gets all the revenue, right? We get the permitting fees, we get the utility fees, we get the property taxes. And so the city feels really, really rich. We go out and build a new police center, build a city hall, put in new parks. We're investing in all this stuff because we have all this, in a sense, free cash flow. But then when you get 25, 30 years out in the future, those bills start to come due. That road needs to be fixed. That pipe is kind of settled and needs to be dug up and replaced. All these bills start to come due. And we see a thing that cities tend to do is in that second life cycle, they tend to take on debt. They'll raise taxes a little bit, they'll cut services a little bit, but they take on lots and lots of debt. And we see city debt levels climb precipitously during that second life cycle. And then when you get to the next echo, the third life cycle, when everything comes due again and you've strung out on debt and you've got your taxes as high as people can go, what you start doing is just having your city fall apart. There's a lot of, I've heard many times the phenomena here of the West Coast exodus to our part of the world here, which I like is exciting in many ways and is very interesting. The state that did this en masse the quickest was California. And a lot of the dysfunction that we chalk up today to being uniquely California dysfunction is just an early manifestation of this development pattern. Because California cities developed exactly like you did. They just did it sooner. I want to show you some charts that we put together. I'm going to do this really quick because not only do I want to get to the end part and still have a little bit of time, but I know a lot of people just charts, not their favorite thing. These you don't have to think real hard about. What we did is we wanted to answer the question about how cities were doing long-term financially. City budgets are very weird things. They're documents of cash flow. So when cities budget, they don't budget the way that they budget with cash budgets, not with accrual budgets. This is a weird thing of government. None of us go out and buy a car or a house or make a major investment and only worry about whether we'll be able to make the payments in the first year. But cities do that like all the time. That's what we do. We look at how much cash we have in our budget. But cities do keep financial records that show their long-term health. They just never refer to them. They come in a report and they kind of, everybody's eyes glaze over and they accept the auditor's report and, we move on. What we did is we grabbed those documents and said, what can these teach us about the financial stability and health of cities? And we developed 6 indicators. I want to just share one with you today. That's the net financial position. This is, in a sense, the accumulated amount of surpluses and deficits that a city has throughout its life. So add those all together, where are we at? Now, cities balance their budget every year. So in theory, this should be a flat line. But this is Kansas City. What we see in Kansas City is that while on paper they're running balanced budgets, in reality they're running indebtedness every year. They're running an annual deficit every year. And so you can see the trajectory down. Kansas City is a deep, deep, deep financial hole that they are in. This is no different than almost every city. I put this one in for you all. I don't really have any other Utah ones, but this is Salt Lake City. Same kind of thing. We've modeled over 100 cities now. We've crowdsourced a lot of this, so some of our local conversations have put these together. But we see the same thing in city after city. Of the over 100 that we've done, we've only found one that is not going like this. It's a small town in Arkansas by an Air Force base, so not like a replicable condition. What we have done as a country is we have grown our cities into insolvency. We have, in the guise of staying out of the Great Depression and experiencing growth in this kind of new and exciting way after World War II, we were able to, yes, goose GDP, yes, create a middle class, yes, lower unemployment, and all those things culturally we look at as very good. But the thing that we did as part of that, or the side effect of making that happen, was we gave cities, local governments, astounding levels of liabilities that they literally can't pay. And let's be clear what a local government is, because I think sometimes the federal government's a very abstract thing, the state government a little less so, but local government is essentially the way we all work together. It's not it shouldn't be some adversarial, predatory type thing. We do see that in cities over time. When they become more and more desperate, they become more and more predatory. You're not in that situation right now, but largely that's because you're still in the growth phase, right? But local government is supposed to be a collection of us, how we work together, how we get things done. And we have, across all of North America, systematically bankrupted our local governments in a way that has robbed them of capacity, and in many cases does make them predatory. At the end of chapter 3 of my first book, I gave it to my mom to read before it came out. She had an advanced copy. She called me up, I remember at the end of chapter 3, which ends with this discussion about Detroit and how Detroit is not some crazy anomalous city. It's really like the first city to try this North American development pattern. In fact, they were the city we all copied. They were the motor city. They were setting up commuters before the rest of us were. They were tearing down buildings before the rest of us were. They were, making parking lots in the middle of town and running highways through the center of the city. They did all that before all of us. They kind of arrive at the destination ahead of us. My mom called me up and she's like, Chucky, this is a very sad book. I said, keep reading, Mom. It does get better. So I want to get to what I think is there's a lot of work that we're doing at Strong Towns to help cities, first of all, recognize this problem. And that's a really important thing, because what we tend to do when we're stressed is look around for a cultural explanation that explains things on our terms. And sometimes, in our world that's very left-coded and right-coded now, we're kind of asked to be very adversarial at the federal level with each other. Some places I visit in this country, that narrative evolves into, well, greedy people aren't paying their share, and this, this is unjust, and this is wrong. And then I go to a different part of the country, and they're like, those people are causing the problems. And everyone has their own kind of weird, messed up narrative. I want us to actually struggle with reality, because we can do all the blaming and all the whatever, but we actually have to deal with these problems locally. And no one's going to come and save us. No one can fix this. In fact, the people that you might turn to fix it are the ones who are causing the problems in many ways. And so, what I want to give you is not a comprehensive set of here's what you do. And I appreciate in the introduction today that, it was said, Strong Towns doesn't come with solutions. We actually, in every single book I've written, said there's no solution. There's only thoughtful ways for us to react and respond and deal with this. Let's start having those discussions. I want to give you some ways to think about how we deal with this, particularly given where you're at, which I think is the most difficult position to be in, which is pain-free and affluent. Because when you're pain-free and affluent, you don't really have a lot of motivation to change. If you are in your 20s and young and healthy, but your family has a history of heart disease and suffers strokes and heart attacks, you can develop a habit of not exercising and eating ice cream and probably be just fine. But you'll have to change at some point, right? And it's almost better to get started early. So here's the number one strategy. We need to have our cities become dynamic places again. I spent some time on those pictures of my daughter, not to be nostalgic, but to actually help you cross a gap of understanding about how cities work. We are used to cities being static places. And, redevelopment for us looks like something being torn down completely and rebuilt, usually with some type of tax subsidy or heroic other effort. That's what we've all grown used to. Anybody in the past, literally go back in all of human history, would not have recognized that. Or if they recognize it, they would recognize it as an outcropping of extreme affluence. Because places that have feedback change and evolve over time. They adapt, they mature, they shift and change, they respond to new opportunities and stresses. So the way we get that feedback loop back, the first thing we do is we recognize that we today have a very high bar of entry to fully participating in our society. We have a bunch of students over here, and the idea is we would like you to stay. But we would like you to stay if you can make enough money to qualify for a 30-year mortgage on an overly inflated house price. Otherwise, we don't know what to do with you. That's a high bar of entry. And I wrote a whole book about how we got there on housing. I want to just talk in general how we do this. So this is something in my hometown we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same city would have called us a house. We've put the word tiny on the front of it and made kind of like a fetish out of it. We created a tiny house ordinance. So if you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house provisions. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors, genuflect in front of the planning board. You've got to go through all this stuff to build what everybody around the world would have understood. My ancestors certainly would have understood is a starter house. How many of you want to live in a 500, 600 square foot house? How many of you at some point in your life have lived in a 500, 600 square foot place? Do you see the difference? When we don't allow this kind of entry level point, what we do is we exclude a whole bunch of people from participating in our society, from co-building the city with us. Now, let's be clear about what a starter house is. A starter house is not a permanent condition. Starter houses do what? They evolve and they change. A person buys into one of these, 600 square feet, then they have a kid. What do? They put an addition on the back. They have another kid, they put on a second story. The neighbor comes over and helps. They go help their neighbor. There's a whole cultural nostalgia we built around barn raising that really comes from this. This is the way cities have been built for all time. We can build these things in the backyards of existing homes, in between two different homes. If you think like an engineer for a minute, you'll recognize that a big core of our problem is we've got too much stuff with not enough tax base to support it. Planners will talk in terms of density. You can hang out on the Strong Towns website from now to the end of time, and you will never see us talk about density, because when planners deliver density, it's really bad. But when humans go out and fill in neighborhoods and thicken them up and respond to opportunities with things like smaller homes and backyard cottages and taking their spare bedroom and converting it into a rental unit, what this does is it matures and thickens up a neighborhood in a way that is hardly perceptible to someone walking by, but makes a massive difference in terms of opportunity for people. Here's a commercial version of this. Muskegon, Michigan was our strongest town of the year winner in 2019. Ivins was one of our contestants this last year. It's a great contest that just highlights wonderful things that cities are doing. I'll reiterate, because I saw one of the questions that was submitted to me earlier this morning we didn't get to, was why was Ivins one of them chosen? Because it's not doing the right thing. And I point out in the contest, it's not about always doing the right thing. It's about having good practices and innovative things that we can share with others. So there are good things happening here. It was really a proud moment to be able to share that with people. But Muskegon is a really astounding place. They're doing many, many great things. And they won our contest in 2019. One of the very cool things they were doing was these things they call the chalets. These are storage sheds, let's be clear. They took a vacant lot in their downtown. They were trying to get businesses to open in the downtown where they had a lot of vacancies. But the problem was that the bar of entry was too high. If you wanted to go in one of those buildings, you had to do things like put in a commercial sprinkler system or what have you. They were having to sign like long-term leases. It wasn't working for startup entrepreneurs. Over here, they had a farmer's market. So lots of people they could bring to town for a farmer's market, but it wasn't showing up in the downtown. So what they did is they took the gap in between, they dropped in these storage sheds, they painted them funky colors, they called them chalets, and they rent them out to startup entrepreneurs for $75 a month. What's an entrepreneur? An investor is someone with capital that's trying to find a place to make capital pay it back. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who doesn't recognize they can fail, but has an idea that they're in love with. You have tons of entrepreneurs. Every city has lots of entrepreneurs. And what Muskegon did is they created a place for entrepreneurs at very low risk to themselves to try things. Try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, figure it out, and ultimately graduate into the core downtown. You can go to the downtown of Muskegon today, and it's not full of chains and franchises. It's full of local businesses. And a lot of them got their start in the storage sheds. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually told this story to a friend of mine named Monty Anderson, who's an incremental developer out of Duncanville, outside of Dallas. And he said, Chuck, that's nothing. We start people in tents. Truly, I went to his place, and they do start people in tents. The idea is to get people a place where they can start, and they can try things, and they can fail, and they can figure it out. Let me give you this last thing, and this is probably the most difficult concept, because it goes against what we look to local government to do today, which is to kind of be the difference maker, be the investor, back the project, take over the infrastructure, build the next big thing. If we want our cities to evolve and mature, if we want them to be responsive, if we want them to be dynamic, we actually need to change our public investment strategy to something that responds to how people use the city. Where are people struggling? At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step approach to making what are the lowest risk, highest financial returning investments that you can make in a city. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people struggle. Where are people having a hard time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to stress humility here. Humility means not presupposing you know what the answer is, but actually going out and trying to understand where people are having a difficult time. Step number 2 then, ask yourself the question, what's the next smallest thing we can do with what we have on hand to address this struggle? Notice I don't say solve. You're not going to solve any problems. Get the idea of solving problems out of your head. What's the thing we can do with what we have on hand? What can we do with paint and a shovel and some straw bales and some cones to like make this thing a little bit better? Step number 3 then, go out and do it. Do it right now. Don't form a committee to study it. Don't bring in a consultant. Just go do it. And then step number 4 is to repeat that process over and over again. This feels radical, but it's not. This is how businesses solve problems. This is how the private sector works in a lot of ways. Steve Jobs was once asked, how'd you come up with the iPod, the very first music thing? And he said, focus groups are dumb. I didn't go ask people what they wanted. If I would have asked them what they wanted, they would have said they wanted a better Walkman. I looked at how they struggled to use a Walkman, and I tried to solve those problems. What we often do in cities is just put together, here's our wish list of things. Here's all the stuff we would like to do. And it's divorced from where people actually struggle. When we go out and do this approach, what we see is that we can make really modest investments. And if we do it wrong, nothing bad happens because it's not very much money. But if things go right, what we see is that the public responds. People actually show you through their actions, not their words, what value is, and it allows us to, with confidence, then take that next step, that next incremental step, that next small investment, and build up from there. There's entire organizations. These are photos from the Better Block group out of Dallas, Texas. Fantastic organization that helps cities do this kind of investment, where they have completely redesigned streets for pennies on the dollar. If you go to New York City, you can actually walk down Broadway and see where they've done this block by block by block. But I can show you lots of small towns where instead of paying $250,000 for an engineering study, paid $10,000 to go out and model what it would look like in the real world. We have the capacity to do some amazing, amazing things at very low cost with very high financial return. And here's kind of the coolest part. If we do this right, we can't help but improve people's lives in the process. And that's the real Strong Towns exciting thing. Let me be clear. This is a different style of local government. It's a different style than what we're used to. What we're used to is uncomfortable for us in some ways, but it's actually a very kind of comfortable platform for us, especially in affluent places, to have complaints and have discussions and have conversations. There's a statement out of Silicon Valley that says, innovation that happens from the top down is orderly but dumb. And innovation that happens from the bottom up is chaotic but smart. If you ask people what they would like their city to be innovative, what they would like that to look like, they would say, I want it to be smart, not dumb. But if you ask taxpayers in affluent places, are you willing to tolerate a little bit of chaos to get smart? They will say no. We want things to be orderly. We want things to be by the book. We want processes that don't feel messy and chaotic. When we have a congestion problem, we want you to solve it. When we have a public safety problem, we want you to throw police at it. When we want, whatever it is, we want to keep our youth, we want to throw a bunch of money at that problem. That's an orderly but dumb kind of approach. If we want smart, smart requires feedback. Feedback requires stress, requires tension, requires us as a society, as a culture, to deal with difficult things. And that's the hardest leap for us to make as an affluent place. What we want to do is just cut out all the messiness, right? And skip right to the end. But we recognize that if we just skip to the end, what we would have is a very dysfunctional high school graduate. It requires that whole journey to actually get to the place you want to get to. Embrace that journey. That's the thing that's going to help you be strong. That's the thing that's going to help you become the community that you want to be. I'm not promising you that it will be easy along the way. I'm not promising you that you will have consensus or agreement. I will say that I love the way that you're approaching it and the way you're talking about it and the way you're trying to come together. If we can humble ourselves to recognize that it's the path in between, you guys can do amazing, amazing things. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for the invitation. I really, really appreciate the time spent and especially the kind and generous words that you've all had. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. We're going to move into our Q&A period. We have about 20 minutes for questions. Please keep them short so we can get to as many as possible in this time. 30 seconds. Susan will be keeping time. After the Q&A, we will do a little wrap up and then Chuck is going to hang around for book signing.
Yes, so we'll have the book bungalow on stage with books. If you didn't bring your book to get signed, you can walk up the stage, purchase a book right there on site, and then get Sucks.
That's super cool. Cool. I see a bunch back here. That's pretty cool.
Okay, first question.
Hi, I'm Karen Goodfellow with Conserve Southwest Utah, organizer of Parade of Gardens that happens this weekend, that help highlight what we can do in the desert with less water. But one of the biggest struggles we have, Chuck, is that we have over 20% of our homes that are occupied only part of the year.
Mm-hmm.
They're part-time homes,
Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3 months out of the year. So that is, obviously it's a second home, so their tax base is a little higher, but we are providing year-round services to those homes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have an easy answer for this one, but let me tell you 2 things that may affect how you think about this. So an extreme example of this is New York City. New York City, property values in New York City have been increasing by double digits for decades. If you are a very wealthy person, it makes a lot of sense for you to buy an apartment, a condo, or whatever in New York City or Vancouver or San Francisco or any number of, there's a handful of places that have these characteristics. And you can buy that and you can actually never go there, never live there, but it is a great investment. The holding costs are relatively low. You're taxed at the same kind of residential rate as everybody else. And so what New York has seen is at a very high percentage of their homes are second homes, and a large percentage of those are completely unoccupied for almost all the year. It's interesting because one of the solutions that they've come up with, or that has been proposed and is being debated right now, is that they're going to do a surcharge tax on those specific homes. And what that does is it increases the holding costs of being there. I'm going to say this, and we try really, really hard not to be political. I feel like when we get to the city level, I can take off the gloves a little bit. Mondami is talking about this, like we're going to tax the rich and we're going to use that money to do this. If you look at it, New York's budget is like $120 billion a year, and this is going to bring in like $500 million. It's nothing from a tax standpoint. From a public policy standpoint, what's interesting is that if it works, what they're trying to do is actually end that, what I'm just going to call the idleness loop that being a good investment creates. And so in a sense, discourage new construction from pandering to that idlelessness and actually create, like, narrow the gap between what people would build for people who want to be there and what people are building for people who just want an investment. Let me give you another insight that is maybe more applicable here locally. I was at a conference for short-term rentals. I went, this is Airbnbs and VRBOs and stuff. I went as an attendee at this conference just to like learn what they talked about. I wanted to understand their business and the market a little bit better. We're planning to write a big thing and create like some advisory things for cities on Airbnbs because it's a huge issue. I'm sure it's a big issue here as well. Here's one of the things that astounded me. They had their vendors, right? They're like the lobby of people who were sponsors. And I went and talked to this one who did mortgages and specialized in Airbnb mortgages. And I said, okay, if I would like to buy and operate an Airbnb, but I don't have good credit, I don't have an income history, and I don't have any cash, how could you help me? And she said, oh, that's really easy. What we do is we project out. We have a website called AirDNA that projects how much revenue you will make from this Airbnb. We write that down as your income and then use that income to qualify for the mortgage. I was in a room with people who had done this 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, 50 times. There's a distortion going on in our marketplace that's more than second homes. And sometimes we perceive it locally as second homes. You know, you're a very desirable place to be in. There's a lot of people who are going to want a second home. I think it's going to be for you to work out like how the taxes should be on that. In Minnesota, a second home is going to pay basically double the residential tax of a regular home, but they're exempt from the school district taxes, which, you know, I'm not sure if there's the right way to do it, but they'll say, well, we don't send kids to school because we don't live here, but you drive the roads, so you know, I don't know if it works out, but that's how we have chosen to do it. I feel like there is a thing there to talk about, but I do think it's being massively distorted by the financial system today, which puts a premium on property stability. And so it makes it a really good investment for people who have investment cash. If I have $10 million of net worth, if I can have half of that in real estate, that's an amazingly stable place to put my money. And we see that over and over and over again.
I'm an architect. I recently had presented a project for a site locally, and I had the city basically said, this is great, this is exactly what we want, this is perfect. Our codes won't run out though.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, these prescriptive codes that we have, these utility and zoning laws, is there a way beyond that to maybe move to like a performative based code where they describe an end goal and let us get creative?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I feel like there is, the short answer to that is yes. I'm generally not a fan of performance-based codes though, because I do feel like now you're in subjective land, and it might work if you're well aligned. If you're not well aligned, it will create a lot of friction. Here's what I've seen cities do that I feel like is a better approach. Let's say that we really like your application. This is exactly what we want to do. To me, that's an opportunity to say, okay, what codes does it violate? Let's change those codes. So many cities want to do like a comprehensive rewrite and fix everything. I actually think we can just take your example and say, okay, do we like it here or do we like it everywhere? If we like it everywhere, then let's just change the code comprehensively so that we can do it. If we like it here, let's create some kind of overlay to make sure that it can happen here and in places that are similar to this. In other words, I think that our code people need to become better at hacking and give up the idea of like comprehensive solutions to things. If someone walks in the door with a plan we like, the answer should be, okay, this doesn't meet our rules. That means our rules are whack. How do we fix those rules with an urgency to it? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, let's go through, I think we have one there and one there.
Yeah, I come from a sample size of only 3, where the property values are appreciating, as you mentioned, and then you have the situation that the cities that you went, except for one, are all plummeting with further and further responsibilities.
Yeah.
In Utah, being the most recent example, if values double, they have the mill rate, and you have to go through a process. Are many of these cities getting into trouble because they're not willing to do the politically challenging thing and say, we need at least inflation, we have other responsibilities? Is that commonplace across the country?
Yeah, that's another big tension. So California has Prop 13. Prop 13 limits your property value in your property tax increase. So it locks in your assessment value in 1982 or something like that, and then it's only allowed to increase by a marginal amount every year. What this has done is it's completely distorted the property market, and it's made cities in California predatory on people. I was actually in a city in Northern California where the mayor was, I'm gonna say this in a not nice way because it wasn't nice. He was trying to hustle commercial business owners out of the city, basically harass them to move because they were locked in at a low property tax rate, and he wanted to get something in that would pay sales tax because that was the only way they could get appreciation. If you go to Michigan, Michigan resets your increases based on last year's valuation. And when you have a big dip like they had in 2008, they still have not caught up. So basically like locked every city into this like low value amount and then kept it going up. There's a movement right now across the country. I think there's 18 states, something like that, that are trying to abolish they have legislation to abolish the property tax. Here's my response to this, because I spent a lot of time today talking about how cities don't have the capacity to meet all their obligations, right? If you limit their tax revenue even more, you're just like forcing that issue in an even greater way. You live in a state that is such astounding diversity, but every city has the same tax structure. Why? If you have a tourist-based city, you should be able to have tourist-y taxes. If you have a mining city, you should be able to have taxes relating to mining. If you're Salt Lake City, where you have a completely different economy than you do here, you should be able to have a different set of taxes. Now, politicians at the state level, there's a populist part and there's a non-populist part. The populist part is people don't like taxes and I can be the hero if I tell local government what to do. I don't have an answer for that populist reaction, except that I wouldn't vote for such a person. A more serious approach would say, what we don't want is we don't want cities to be in a situation where you move in and then they change the game on you and devalue your property, and now there's your transaction costs of moving are high, or we become predatory in some way. And I feel like there's a good way to counter that, which is anytime we change tax regimes, there's like a 10-year phase-in period. So we're going to go to a land value tax, or we're going to split and now have a partial property tax and a partial tourist overlay tax. Those things would phase in over a period of time, so you wouldn't have like a massive jerking people around. But we need to give cities a broad toolbox of things so that they can customize their approach to what their actual local economy is. By the way, that's what every city operated like before 1970. So in the first 2.5 decades after World War II, when we were building this stuff for the first time, every city had their own local taxes. We generally changed that across the country, state by state, in the 1970s. And I want you to understand why. The idea was an efficiency one. We wanted to grow faster, And if you're a Walmart or a McDonald's coming to the state of Utah, if you know, because you're at the Capitol, what the taxes are for the whole state, you can actually just go out and build them and know what you're getting. But if I got to go to your city and figure out your taxes, go to your city, figure out your taxes, go to your city, and it's less efficient for me as the Walmart to do that. So in order to be pro-growth, we be pro-efficiency, and we standardize it for everybody, which means your tax code is the same as a city that doesn't look at all like you, but you all have the same incentives. That doesn't make any sense.
So we have time for one last question, and I have one over here. I do want to mention though, please stick around afterwards and then get in touch with our Strong Towns team. So we'll take the last question, then we'll do a quick wrap up, and then you'll be able to come on stage and mingle and chat a little longer.
Okay, so we kind of came up with this question together, but coming from like us, maybe as like a younger community.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do both, where a town has affordable housing but also can cater to investors? Because I know a lot of people our age struggle to find affordable housing, even affordable places to rent, while dealing with finding jobs that pay a livable wage.
Yeah.
For what the housing market is here in Southern Utah.
Yeah. So I wrote an entire book about housing. And the answer to the first half of your question is like, yes, we need to aggressively build and in a sense allow for the construction of what I would just call entry-level housing. I feel like part of the tension is that when we build affordable housing, it is going to be a subsidized large unit. And I think the compromise here is recognizing that you'll probably start in a place that you don't want to stay in. Young people tend to be okay with that, but the people doing the regulating have a hard time envisioning. I mean, you saw when I said, who wants to live in a 500 or 600 square foot house? Nobody raised their hand. The problem with that is that when they're in a regulatory environment and someone comes in and says, we should change the code to allow 500 or 600 square house, they're like, oh my gosh, we can't do that. Like, that would be horrible. They're not considering that they once lived in that, had that option for themselves, need to provide that for other people. I do think that is a separate question than the investment one, though. And, you know, let me give the strongest argument I can for why you want Airbnbs and why you want investment capital in the community. The strongest argument is those people will build more homes. And anytime you can build more homes, you're going to add to the overall inventory, and maybe it'll cycle out of being an Airbnb at some point, or maybe it'll cycle out of what have you, and it frees up other properties for other people. I don't know if I completely buy that argument, but we definitely need investment capital building homes. The challenge is the scale that we need to build at for entry-level homes. There's not much capital there. And so part of our housing toolkits, we were talking about that in the last session, not this one. If you go to strongtowns.org and look at the top-down menu, one of them is going to have a set of housing toolkits on it. One of the toolkits that we're working on is about how cities can provide that capital where the market is not providing it on entry-level units. Because a lot of these things are not mortgageable in a 30-year product. They're not, because they're not securitizable, the whole financial side of it. So I feel like there is a role for cities to fill that gap without losing money and without taking risk. I think the city can actually do that. But yeah, I mentioned Muskegon, Michigan earlier. Muskegon, Michigan has a program where they will pay for developers that build houses, I think it's up to 900 square feet, in existing neighborhoods on existing utilities, so no new public costs. Planners might call this infill. If you were going to do that, the city will, for the buyer, make your down payment. They'll pay 20% of the cost. Now, how does the city do that? They use tax increment financing. So the property's paying this much taxes as raw land. When the house is built, it pays this much taxes. They take that amount of money. The city goes and borrows the 20%. They make your down payment for you. And then they take that tax increment. So they're taking money that would normally go to the city, the county, and the school district. They take that and they use that to pay off that 20%. And then when that's paid off, then the taxes go where they normally would. This allows the city to use their leverage capacity, because cities can borrow very cheaply, to get people into houses. They will create a clawback provision. So if you flip the house after a year, you got to pay whatever's left on the loan. Like you don't get to have that 20% gain immediately. You've got to stay there for a period of time, 12 years, 15 years, to get the full gain. But you can leave at any time. You just got to pay back what's left. And it doesn't cost the city any money, and it doesn't have the city take any risk, really, because if the property went into default, the city would actually become the primary, in a sense, the primary position for repayment. So before Wells Fargo or US Bank is going to get repaid, the city would get repaid. This is the type of program that, if we're very serious about affordable housing for youth who are starting out, we can do that all day. Cities have the capacity to borrow, in a sense, unlimited amounts of money if there's a revenue stream attached to it in that way. How does that sound? Yeah, that's what we need. I know.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, everybody.
To wrap up, we've heard a lot about the challenges of growth. For those in the audience today, what is one key action we can take?
If we're talking the people in the audience, I think the thing that we can do is understand our own gut reaction to things and have a little bit more humility about the situation when we're talking to others. This is a really difficult set of problems. It's a really complex set of problems. There's no clear way to solve them. And so working together is going to require all of us to, in a sense, I'm not saying give up on the things that you hold dear, but be open to a conversation that has a lot of nuance, a lot of experimentation to it, a lot of trying things. And I think that's going to require us to be, in a sense, like cultural ambassadors for change in a way that, in a less functional community, you wouldn't be called to be.
And thank all of you for being here. We're so excited to launch Strong Towns in our community. These are some ways that you can continue to be involved. We need you to be a part of this conversation. Differing views are good. That's how we come to a better consensus moving forward. Lost my place. Before you leave, we have grab-and-go bags for you. We'd like for you to take a survey. We are going to move into the book signing now. So if you'll come line up on this side, we'll raise this. Books will be for sale here, and then Chuck is going to be here for you to get your book signed.
Super cool. Thank you, everybody.